Hello and welcome to our first animation tutorial. So this is Blender and that's what we're going to use. This is Blender 2.79, which is at the recording of this, the latest version. And there's a new version coming out very shortly, 2.8, which will be very different. So let's get stuck in here. So Blender's a two-handed affair. One hand on the mouse, one hand on the keyboard. There's loads of keyboard shortcuts to learn. There's about 10 that you're going to use again and again and again, and you'll get used to them very quickly. But eventually, if you keep using it, there are more than I care to remember. So it's a two-handed sort of operation. I was going to press N here. I'm just going to bring up the properties of this 3D window. Roll down with my mouse, and I'm going to press Start Display. So now over here for the rest of the tutorial you'll see the keys that I press, so it doesn't look like there's magic happening on screen. So a couple of things before we begin. There's three render engines in Blender. There's a game engine, this one here that we're in here, the Blender render engine, which is about 15 years old, and then this one called Cycles. So we're going to change the Cycles. And then over here, actually let's just go through the panels. This is the 3D viewport, the editor, where we're going to move things and edit them. There's a timeline, very similar to a timeline in an editing package. This is an outliner, so this is like Windows Explorer with all the objects that are in the scene. So we've got we've got a camera, it says camera, we've got a cube, it says cube, and we've got a lamp, it says lamp. And then this here is like the inspector, it's a properties window. So whatever object is selected, we have its properties. So if I right click, which is how you select objects, you right click on the lamp, we'll get the properties here of the lamp. If I right click on the camera, get the properties of the camera. If I right click on the cube, I can get the properties of the cube. By default it's on this little kind of icon of a camera, and these are basically the output options. So let's have a look. So it says frame rate 24, so let's change that to 25. Resolution HD, so 1920 1080, but it's at 50%, so I'll make that 100%. And then it says CPU rendering. I'm going to change that to GPU. I'm going to use my graphics card. If you don't have that option, don't worry about it. I'll show you how to do that another day. Just any difference it'll make is it'll make things slower if you're using CPU, depending on your machine, but generally slower. Okay, so let's have a look over here at our viewport. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to make a ball bounce. And that's one of the hardest things to do, believe it or not, to get it right, to get it like a really beautiful bouncing ball. And what we're going to look at is two techniques in animation, really simple techniques, where things squash and stretch. So I'm going to start by deleting this cube. So I'm going to press X and then delete. Just left click on delete. This little red and white circle here is called a 3D cursor. And here are my little window. So to open this window I press the N key. N toggles it on and off. It says 3D cursor location 000. So it's right in the middle of this 3D world. And wherever this 3D cursor is, if I left click, I can position it, and then you can see the coordinates here of a change, X, Y, and Z. Wherever this is if I add an object, that's where the object will appear. So if I add a sphere, it'll appear here. If I add a sphere over here, it'll appear here. So it's going to hit X and delete both of them. So we're going to make sure this says 000. So we're right in the middle, and then I'm going to add. So I'm going to go add mesh UV sphere. So there's a sphere right in the middle of our 3D world. Now, when we're editing, we try to use not this mode here. It says perspective mode. I'm just going to roll down here, and where is it? No, it's in display. This is a little button here. It says toggle quad view. So when we click that, we see our original view here, the user view. Then we can see from the right, from the front, and from the top. Now they look all identical because a sphere looks the same no matter what direction you look at it. But if we had, a person or a complex object, we'd be looking at it from its side, from its front, and from on top. And that would give us a really good idea of how big it was and where each part of the object was relative to the other. and you don't quite get that when you look through this view here. So these are called orthographic, and this is called perspective. And we're going to not use this view here, we're going to put an orthographic view in here. So on the numpad, so if you're on a laptop, this will be harder to do. So on the numpad, you press 1 to go into front view, and then 5 to go into orthographic. Now I'm going to press the Z key, and that toggles between wireframe and solid mode. So I can just press Z on and off. So I'm going to leave it in wireframe for now. And I'm just going to press 5 on the numpad, so you see the difference between, so that's orthographic, sorry, that's perspective. So perspective gives you perspective, it gives you depth. You can see that it's a sphere. And orthographic, it could be a pancake, it could be a circle, and completely flat. So you can toggle again just by pressing the 5 key on the numpad between the two. So we're going to work on this in orthographic mode. So the middle mouse wheel on your mouse, if you don't have one, again, if you're on a laptop, this will be difficult. The middle mouse wheel zooms in and zooms out on the view. We can right click on objects to select them, but all we're interested in this tutorial is the sphere. So I'm going to take the sphere, and there's a couple of ways to move it. So again, it's going to slide up here. So the object that is selected, you can see here it says location 7 point blah 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 -6 5. This one has slightly different location. So the object that's selected, this is its location here, its rotation and its scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this. Now I can do, let's say I want to move it up here on Z. I can slide it up and down on Z. I can grab the blue arrow, move it up and down, or I can press a key on the keyboard, which is like the move key. And it's G for grab, so I can hit G, move it anywhere I want, and when I'm happy with its position, I'm going to left click. So this is where I'm going to position it here, just slightly off to the left. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a very short, 1.5 second animation of the ball bouncing. So let's do that. So at the moment it's set to start at 1 frame and end at 250 frames, which if you do your maths and you're used to this from video, that's 10 seconds. So 2 seconds would be 50 frames. So let's do 2 seconds. So I'm going to change my end frame to be 50. And we'll just zoom in a bit on that. You don't have to worry about that. So when I press play now, it'll play 50 frames and then it'll loop back to the start and just play them over and over again so we can watch the animation repeatedly. So what I want to do is I want to record this position here, and I'm going to do that by pressing I for insert keyframe. And when I do that, I get a big menu. And what do I want to insert keyframes on? Well, I'm going to put them on location, rotation, and scale. Because I'm going to change, well, I could actually just go location and scale, but I'll do all three. If I just keyframe location, then I'm not recording any of the other data. So I want to record all three. So lock, rot, scale. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see all of these here have turned yellow to indicate there's a keyframe. Now I'm just going to move off the frame. You can see they've gone green, and then I go back onto that frame that has a keyframe, they go yellow again to indicate there is a keyframe here. Now there's other ways to examine keyframes in Blender. We may have a look at them in a minute. I can go into this thing called Dope Sheet, and there's a graph editor, and there's all sorts of ways to look at our information, but we won't worry about them for now. So that's frame 1. So it's going to fall, and we're going to land pretty much on the origin here. So let's say it takes, 18 frames to fall. So I'm going to press G and move it in here. And I'm just going to use this red line as the ground. Now it doesn't have to be exact, this is just an exercise. So I'm going to place it there at 18 frames and then insert a keyframe here. So I'm going to go I, and location, rotation, and scale. So again, I've got a keyframe here. Now I'm going to bounce up, so if I scrub backwards here, I will actually see the animation. So it does a thing called tweening. So you just tell it where it starts, where it ends, and it will work out all of the in-between frames. So I'm going to land here on 18, and then I'm going to go back up. So if I fall that distance in 18 frames, to go up half the distance will probably take me about 10 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 28. I'm going to go G and up to about here. Insert keyframe, press I, location, rotation, scale. And then I'm going to fall in, say, we'll get to about 35. So I'm going to go G, fall to here, press I, then I'm going to go up to, say, 43, go G, and go up about half the height again, insert keyframe, and then we'll just go to the end. We'll go to frame 48, we'll go G, and bring it to rest here. Now, it wouldn't obviously rest here, it would probably have a couple more very small bounces, but we're just going to concentrate on these here. So I'm going to press play. So, as you can see, that's awful. And it's good for you to see how awful it looks. That just changing the position of something doesn't give it a realistic or even appealing sort of movement. There's a few things going on here that are interesting, and we'll have a little examination of them now. So first thing is the velocity of the ball. So it's not a consistent velocity, so it falls, it slows, it accelerates, it slows, and that's because, you know, by default in Blender, animations have what's called a Bezier curve. So we're going to examine the Bezier curve. I'm just going to change here to the graph editor and zoom out a bit. So this line here, this blue line, is showing us the movement of the sphere on the z-axis, but we can also see that it's curved. So if the line were straight going from here to here, then it would have a completely linear velocity, so it would travel at a completely the same speed. But every time the curve shallows out, the movement's going to slow down. So I'm going to take this handle here, I'm going to right click on it and go G, and I'm going to straighten that line, and then I'm going to take this one here. So I've right clicked on the keyframe, and now I'm going to right click on this handle and go G. Oh, sorry, wrong one. So I want to speed it up in here, so I'm going to go G and straighten it. So that's straight. So then it's going to hit, and we want it to sort of V up. I don't mind if it slows a little bit, because that would be a natural slowing as it kind of ran out of velocity and then it fell again. But we want the fall to be a little steeper, and then we want to kind of have this V again. So I'm going to go G and bring that up there, and then same with this one, G, and yeah, bring him in. And so we're going to leave that like that and see what difference it makes to the movement. So I'm just going to go back now to my 3D view. So I've got a little sort of aberration here, a little kind of mistake as it goes, but the rest of it looks a bit better. Now the main part of this tutorial, so we're 13 minutes in, and I hope to be finished in about 20 minutes. So the main part of this tutorial is squash and stretch. So I'm just going to stop it here for a second. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to have the ball fall, and then just before it hits the ground, we're going to stretch it. We're going to make it physically longer, as if the velocity of the ball was making it longer, like you would see in a cartoon. And then when it hits the ground, we're going to squish it, so it's going to get physically smaller on the z-axis here, on the vertical axis. And then it's going to rebound and stretch again, but not as much. It'll go back to its original shape, and then just before it hits the ground again, it'll stretch, but a little bit less, and then squash, compress a little bit less, and go back up. And we'll repeat it there. So the key to this is to maintain the volume. So there's no good in squashing it. I'll show you now. So I'm going to go to frame 18, zoom in a bit, and I'm going to press S and then Z, and then I'm going to move my mouse towards the sphere. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go G and Z. So I'm going to move it down on the Z axis and then left click. This will not look well because I've made it smaller on the Z axis, so the ball has squashed, but where has all of the volume gone? So it needs to go out wider on X. So I'm going to press S, X, and now I'm going to re-keyframe it because we've changed its value. So I'm going to go I, insert keyframe on location, rotation, and scale. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take frame 17, I'm going to scale, press S on Z, make it a little bit longer, and then scale it on X, and go I, insert keyframe on location, rotation, scale, go back to frame 16, press S and Z, but then S and X, and insert keyframe. Okay, and then so it's going to be at its original shape back here, so it's going to do that, but we want it to be back at its original shape around here, so around frame 15. So here I'm just going to go S and Z. Okay, and at this point I'm going to, so my scale here should be 1, and my scale here should be 1. And I'm going to go I and insert keyframe. So it's going to go boing. Oh, so here, here. So it's got smaller here, so I'm going to press S and X. So it should be about 1.2. Insert keyframe. And then this one here, again, it's too small. So I'm going to go SX 1.5 maybe. And then 18, again, far too small for all that volume. SX. We'll bring it out there. Again, it's kind of a cartoon, so, or a cartoon feel. So we need to do the opposite on the other side. So if by this frame here everything is back to normal, we can just go 1, 1, 1 and insert our keyframe. And here we'll scale it on Z, scale it on X, and insert a keyframe. Now we don't want it to go below the line, so we'll just, on this frame here we'll pull it up a bit, scale it on Z a little, and scale it on X a little. And we'll scale it a tiny bit on Z, tiny bit. There we go. And insert keyframe. So now we'll have a look at our first bounce. Okay, so what we need to do now is repeat this on the second bounce, so which is on around frame 35. So let's go in and do that. So let's go to frame 35, and we will on frame, we'll just do 2 either side. So on this frame here, I'm going to scale on Z. Actually, let me hit escape here. So on frame 32, we'll go insert keyframe, location, rotation, and scale. And that gives us 1, 2, and then we're there, 1, 2. So on frame 38, we'll do the same. We'll insert a keyframe so it retains this position. And then here, we'll scale it on Z, and scale it on X. And here, we'll scale it on Z. Oops, and scale scale it on X, and then on this one we're going to squish. So scale on Z, GZ. Now this is not, whoops, GZ. This is not as dramatic because it's not moving as fast as the previous one. And we need to do the same on this one, so S on Z, S on X, and S on Z, S on X. Okay, so now we're going to look at our animation. Now it probably needs to rotate in that, and the first fall is too small or too slow. So again, we're going to go back to our graph editor. We'll take this here, and we'll just go G to move it, and I'll just move it forward to there, and try and keep that straight line. And we'll move back so you can see. Oh, let's play. So what we've got now is an animation that has some of the attributes, so it's far from perfect, has some of the attributes of like a proper animating sort of cartoon ball. So there's compression on landing, and some stretching when it goes out. Now we probably need a bit of stretching at the very top as it accelerates down. How much it stretches and how much it compresses gives us all sorts of information about what it's made of. So if it stretched an awful lot, then and if it compressed an awful lot and got very wide, then maybe it was like a water balloon. If it compresses a very small amount, then maybe it's like a football. So it's something much harder. So we can, through this sort of process, we can say an awful lot about the object that's actually being animated. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. So we're 22 minutes in. Just before we finish up, I'm just going to go File, Save As. I'm just going to call this ball. And I'm putting it on my desktop, and I'm going to go Save. And I'm going to place this blend file in our resource folder so that you can look at it and see what I've done, see where the keyframes are, etc. And this is not a prime example of a pristine bouncing ball, but you'll see, you'll be able to experiment with it anyway if you're having trouble trying to replicate it yourself. So what we're going to hopefully do over the next while is try and look at basic sort of animation techniques, and then also try and work on some modeling. If you can, there are I think 180 videos or something on this YouTube channel. Most of them, or a lot of them, are in Blender, showing you different ways to model and make things and animate things. So if you have any spare time, have a look at a couple of them, because we'll be going on to make a character and getting that character to walk and run, etc. Okay, so that's enough for now. Thanks.